So much for scheduling. I had to do it all manually.
That's the Unix problem.
All right, we're gonna get started. It's 6:30. Does everybody have a beverage? Okay, good. So I'd like to apologize for this month already because I forgot to get a lightning talk for us. Does anyone have a lightning talk they want to get tonight? Come on, like 5 minutes. It could be how much you like clouds. I don't care. And I don't even mean like cloud systems, like real clouds. Okay, fine. What's that?
I can hypnotize you real quick.
See me after I've had a few more drinks. Awesome. Welcome to DenverScript. Get rowdy, damn it. Yes. Any first timers? Oh. Thank you for newcomers and thank you for repeat business. Except we're not business. No. So these things for free education, free booze, free pizza, all that stuff is not possible without sponsors. So Co-Talent, if you don't know, is where you're at right now. They are sponsoring the venue and the beer. Sponsoring the food is the co-organizers because we couldn't get a sponsor, so. If anybody knows anybody who wants to be a sponsor, let me know. We could use one. Epic Brewing, they're just down the street. They're kind enough to give us a slight discount on our beer. And same thing with Denver Pizza Company. So, you know, love the business. And also Front-End Masters. So every month we're giving away three-month subscriptions. 3 of those, which is, I think, roughed out to be like $90 value. So we'll be giving 3 of those away, so stay tuned for when. So cool. Next part is what's going on in JS land. Guillermo is not here today, so I had to come up with what happened in Chrome 69. So there's a highlights video and release notes, and we'll post out everything that we put on here to the meetup page, so don't feel like you have to write anything down. Who remembers when Chrome came out? Who started swearing their fucking head off that they had another browser to support? Guess who uses it every day now? So it's been 10 years ago. It's crazy. In Chrome 69, did anyone notice that your UI has like totally changed now? Very much. I don't know. I can take it. I can leave it. It's all right. So some of the new features that they added, CSS scroll snap, which is in the next level 4 spec, which, guess what? Gives you the ability to create carousels without carousel JavaScript code. So like, you basically get an over-scrolling div, and with just one line of CSS, it allows you to act just like a carousel. So that's pretty cool.
How about Bootstrap?
Or rolling your own. Don't do it. Display cutouts. So all these sweet phones coming out now with that stupid fucking dip at the top. And you know your page like goes behind that thing. They now are, at least Chrome is, giving you the support to add this. It goes into the meta tag for the viewport. I forget what the actual attribute was, but it'll actually put in some extra margin around everything, just so phones that have that notch, you don't have to worry about it anymore. WebBlocks API. Is anyone familiar with the WebBlocks API? Yeah, I was trying to understand it before this, and it still hurts my brain. But basically, you can set an asynchronous call and put a lock around it and basically tell everything like it's like the ultimate blocker. You know, it just says nothing else can execute. Can't download anything else. You can't make another request. You can't parse any other files or do any other function executions until this thing is finished. And it also helps apparently with apps that run in multiple tabs. Like I said, I was trying to wrap my mind around it in a few minutes, and it was still kind of gibberish. So we'll have a link to it. You can go RTFM. Also, conic gradients. I think that's how you say it. You can now do gradients like this. So the next time your boss says make it pop, just do that. That's all you gotta do. Mike, you want to talk about Smushgate?
Oh yeah. So a while back, I think TC39 made a joke they were going to rename Flatten to Smush, and then everybody lost their shit over that. But now the array prototype is going to get flat and flat map, which replaces flatten. So yes, that's cool. New stuff on the prototype. Yeah.
Also, those are two new functions that have been added to Chrome 69 is flat and flat map, now that they've renamed it. What else? What else have people been seeing in JavaScript land that they got excited about or thought was cool or stupid or anything? Come on. Don't be shy. Easy.
Quick, somebody look at a phone.
Guess we'll have 6 3-month subscriptions to you.
You just gave it away.
I don't think anybody's heard.
Nobody listens to Mike. Mike is now, as of yesterday, or no, today. It's all work. He's now one of our new co-organizers. So welcome, Mike, to the co-organizer meeting. Don't worry, I'm not gonna make you pitch in for pizza, seeing I just brought you on today. Yesterday. Anything else?
Chrome 70, so not Chrome 69, Chrome 70 is going to use a tint sort for arrays greater than 10 instead of the quick sort. So you're getting some stability that the quick sort didn't have. Did you get all that? Yeah.
That's actually not bad for just eyeballing him the whole time typing. So, yeah, it's only a few typos.
We don't even need to correct that. I'm fine with that.
Talking about you. Close enough. Sweet. Job announcements. Does anybody have a job that they'd like to announce?
I work at Zen Planner, and we're looking for an engineer test. So
Anyone else? Not developer specific. I work at Connectify. We are looking for a UX visual designer, I think is what they're calling it, and also a product manager. So if anyone has people that are into that, or if you're into that, come see me. And I will be building out a front-end team starting next year. So if you're in the job market in January, think about me. Anyone else? Job announcements? Go. Everyone? Malcolm. You don't need this. We'll see if it was the dongle now.
Never plug this thing into an HDMI port before, so
do you have one?
it's all through my Thunderbolt port.
go.
Crush it.
Let me get this set up.
Or your
Cool. All right, so for those of you who don't know, my name is Malcolm. Can anyone see me?
Like, hit the light back.
See the screen.
Is that better?
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Malcolm. I am a test engineer at Vertifor, and I work in .NET and C#. But this is a high-level test, or this is a high-level talk, and it'll deal with how to use behavior-driven development in your everyday life as developers. So like I said, I'm a test engineer at Vertifor, but my background is completely different. I started out at Galvanize, JavaScript-based bootcamp. And there we have a final project that we call a capstone. And the leader of our bootcamp used to walk around the halls during capstone week saying, features not branches, features not branches. And he explained it to me a bunch of times, but I never really got it until I started my current role as a test engineer. So coming from JavaScript, I got hired into a role that didn't use JavaScript at all and was more focused on the QA side of things as opposed to the development side of things. And so I had to learn this concept called behavior-driven development, which is a big concept, but I'll help break it down for you a little bit. Here is BDD in a tweet. Using examples at multiple levels to create a shared understanding and surface uncertainty to deliver software that matters. So what does that really mean? What it really means is we need to take the customer specifications and preserve them all the way through development, through testing, and back again. What is BDD? So BDD, it preserves the business value, uses shared language, and is an agile methodology, not a methodology, but it fits in with the agile. Dan North, who wrote that previous tweet, developed it way back in 2006, I believe. And it was a byproduct of both test-driven development and domain-driven design, if any of you guys know what that is. So some of the principles of BDD are behavioral specifications, keeping the customer in mind throughout the development process. Specification is ubiquitous language, and we'll get into that in a little bit. And using specialized tools, and that's something I'm going to not talk about a whole lot today because that's more on the QA side of things, but it ties in a little bit. So for behavioral specifications, you really have to start with what the customer wants or the business value. That means that the stakeholders will talk to the customer as an agile, and they will sort of see what features they can develop out of what the customer needs. Now, ideally, this is a working relationship, and it's not just the stakeholder translating what the customer says, but exactly. So then out of that business value, they will develop user stories, which are slices of that feature broken down to smaller groups, which you as developers use. And then also myself as a QA engineer will then break down and test. And then from there, I also use examples that I test. Here's a graph that illustrates it. So you take the business goal, break it down into features. From there, break it down into user stories. And from there, you'll take the examples, like a use case, and then turn that into what's called an executable specification. Basically, that is the code that I'm writing or the step that I test. So here's an example of how we would use a feature, or here it's called a narrative, to break down that logic even further. So here we're taking the user story, and that's written in normal user story logic in order to encourage travelers to book with Flying High. As the Flying High sales manager, I want travelers to earn frequent flyer points when they fly with us. And so that's taking the bigger picture and putting into a business need. Like, what will the customer get out of this feature that we are developing? And then what I do as a QA, I will break this down into scenario further. So the scenario is earning standard points from an economy flight. So it's an example of the feature that we're going to be using. Given the flying distance between Sydney and Melbourne, and as I'm a standard frequent flyer member, when I fly from Sydney to Melbourne, then I should earn 439 points. So that's the Gherkin language, and that's breaking it down to basically given, when, then logic. So given is basically the groundwork, like what is happening, what is already established, what already works, and is just continuing that logic, saying there's multiple things that exist. And then the when is, what is happening, and then is the expected result. And these are the executable specifications, or what was broken down. So you can see how we're taking something the customer wants, just I want travelers to earn frequent flyer points when they fly with us, and breaking it down into specific examples that still preserve the business logic. So specification as ubiquitous language. That's basically a fancy way of saying that throughout the development process, all the way from the stakeholder talking to the customer, all the way down to the developers, we're using the same language throughout. So instead of thinking things from a technical perspective, break things down from the customer side of things. So that way, on an agile team with a stakeholder or and devs where a stakeholder might not necessarily have the technical background, and the devs might not necessarily have the business background, things can be understood at all levels when they're talking amongst themselves. So how are we using BDD as devs? The biggest thing to keep in mind is outside-in development. Keeping the customer specifications in mind when we are developing and writing our unit tests. I have an example here. So, given this is that Gherkin language, or the step definitions that I'm writing as a QA. Let's break it down a little bit. So given Joe Jones is the initial status frequent flyer member, and that's just a variable. And he has a certain number of points. When he earns extra points, then he should have a status of the final status. And so if we break that down, taking that higher level logic and breaking it down into smaller individual unit tests that you as developers can use to develop, we can read that as, given that that person has to have a name. They have to have a first name and a last name. And they have to have a frequent flyer number. They should also have bronze status, because that is the first status, before gold or platinum. And they should be able to upgrade to a new frequent flyer status as I earn more points. Those are individual tests that you can write as developers that will help you form the development process that keeps the initial goal of when I'm developing, or as I earn more miles, I need to gain status. So to wrap up, why should you keep BDD in mind when you are developing? You keep the customer specifications throughout the process. So you keep the goal in mind from the very beginning. You write clean. It helps write clean code because you're writing, you're not using any terms that get confusing, and there's no wasted work. This one is important because when you're developing from the inside out, sometimes you can seem like you need things, but in fact, you really don't. So it keeps everything has a value to the user in the end. And that just makes things get shipped faster and better. And that's about it. This is my contact information if you wish to contact me. And does anyone have any questions? Fine.
So you talked about the Gherkin language and like that's the given when then kind of writing the scenario.
Yeah.
That kind of lays out the test case.
Yeah.
I guess I've started to get into it because I think we're starting to use it as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is it the language that is also like, your stakeholders can write the given when thens and define your test cases for you, and then essentially that becomes your executable code?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, because that's part of what I don't know it yet.
So what Brian is talking about is this right here. And yes, I didn't misspeak. Ideally, your stakeholders would be writing this. But for my purposes as a test engineer, I would be taking this code and writing the code to automate this step. So, for example, in this scenario, if you were just tracking, if we were just tracking the number of miles, I would write a step that measured, that would establish, I would write the step definition based upon the Gherkin, and inside the step definition, there would be steps to automate or test each of the steps. Emily?
Can you talk a little bit maybe about when people don't use behavior-driven development, sort of some of the negative consequences that affect you as a test engineer?
So, lot of that, the way it impacts me the most is that it impacts the team. Because there's a lot of wasted work that might happen because I'm only testing the feature only needs to have certain requirements. So if you're not, the code isn't going to be as focused, and it's not going to keep. It's essentially a more focused way of writing code, and if you develop from the inside out, then there could be a lot of unnecessary code or messy code that needs to be refactored. So, it doesn't necessarily make my life harder, but it helps the team deliver software faster.
Well, it seems like you could write more meaningful, like your test would be more meaningful if the code was structured in a way that was behavior driven instead of or branches, not features.
Exactly.
Just to dive onto that, we use DDD right now where I work, and one of the issues I've witnessed is that the developers will define their own, test cases, and then show the code to test the API, whatever. So in a lot of those cases, they actually miss the business value, and they might go in one direction instead of the customer or the stakeholder defining and writing out this Gherkin style language that then you derive the test cases from. So I can definitely see the value in this approach.
Yeah, and the behavior development approach, ideally, the test engineer is defining what unit tests need to be written. But again, like with everything, they're put into practice in different ways.
Is Unity more concerned with the happy path type of thing? So if I am this type of flyer, I get this many points. Is there ever is it ever written in such a way to try and say if they go out to do this, then they should be allowed to do that? Does that make sense?
I think in some level that comes in with the assertions and the expected outcome. So if you want one specific outcome and not others, there are ways that you can input this into tests. I don't have an image of it now, but you can insert different outcomes and different variables. But ideally, you are focused on the happy path because that's what the customer wants. The not happy path is more manual testing. Anything else? Any questions at all?
I'll hit you with another one. What happens if there's a disagreement or no shared vocabulary between the business and engineering?
Then, so as you write, as the customer specifications become the scenarios, and then become the step definitions, that flows down. And so if the tests that the automation engineer is writing don't necessarily recognize the names that are being written by the devs, that can cause a lot of confusion, sort of like CSS classes in a way.
So how do you kind of mitigate those issues?
So that's where using the same language across, development comes in, where, if you're talking about, instead of using a technical term for something, you would use the term that came through when the stakeholder was talking to the customer.
Would you think this would be useful in a 10-person startup?
That's a good question. I think it would be, because I've never worked for a startup before, but it focuses a lot of the work, and the less wasted work is better in the startup, I'm assuming. So it really focuses what you are delivering, instead of writing, just making a feature work, I guess you could say.
Would you consider it like more or less, even though like costly in terms of time compared to something like TDD? In that vein, because I do work for a small startup, and it sounds awesome, but barely have. The fact that we test at the size that we are, I think it's pretty unique. It's like the fact that we test right now.
Yeah, so ideally behavior-driven development incorporates with TDD, because you are using the BDD logic to write the unit tests. So out of this, Gherkin language up here, that you would use points. Sorry, I touched my name. Don't know if I realize it. You are fleshing out the low-level requirements and using those to write the unit tests.
Would you say it's like an extra step on top of writing unit tests, or just a smarter way of writing unit tests? Again, going kind of back to like the cost of time from that perspective, and just having a small lead team where you don't have designated test engineers.
BDD is definitely better for companies that do have, QA engineers. But it's still good to keep the customer's behavior in mind and the features and how they're actually being used.
What kind of tools are available to support that process?
So on my side of things, there's tools like JUnit and Cucumber is what I use. Actually use SpecFlow. And that will take this Gherkin language right here and associate it to the steps that I write, and then it will use a WebDriver like Selenium to actually run those tests and use the assertions to have those tests either pass or fail. Anything else?
As for like bugs and like backlog of bugs that might not be like super important at the time, but are still in the backlog, are you like at Vertipore, do you have a team dedicated to that? And you guys do your branches or features, or like I know at Zenplanner we have one team that's focused on features, and then we have bugs that another team is focused on, and then we have an automation test team. So I guess I'm just wondering.
So how it works at Vertipore is that we have a QA and a test engineer actually on Agile teams. And so if a bug comes up that is a result of the feature that was developed by a team, it'll get assigned to that team to fix later. And that's ideally how it works, but that process is still being worked out. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Malcolm. So it's a short night tonight, but there is plenty of beer and still lots of pizza. And stick around, network, hang out, geek out, do whatever. Thank you, everyone.
How do you